Hello, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the session organisers for the invitation. As a committee member of the EAS Inclusion Working Group, I'm happy to provide an overview of the many benefits that virtual conferences provide. Whether we are theorists or observers, I'm sure that when we approach a problem, we sit down and consider the relative contributions of different factors. If I adjust this parameter by so and so amount, how much of an impact does that have in the final models? If I measure this quantity with a certain precision, how does that feed through to the final analysis? Well, the scale of the problem in terms of global CO2 emissions is so huge that if we simply halve the amount of travel that we do for work, that simply is not going to be enough. We need to reduce our CO2 emissions drastically, and we need to reduce them right now. And virtual conferences allow us to do exactly that. Especially when you consider that astronomers have a much larger carbon footprint compared to the average global citizen. The numbers alone speak for themselves. But if you feel that that's not the case, then maybe we need to try a different tack. Oh, won't somebody please think of the children? Indeed, many of us are, including Frans Timmermans, the Vice President of the European Commission, who has drawn attention to the fact that our most basic needs for food and water may be hard to come by if we don't make significant changes. He also says that we need to recapture that feeling of a purpose, doing something not for yourself, but for others, which I think has always led to society being at its best. In fact, we are already doing this during this coronavirus pandemic by staying at home and social distancing in order to protect the most vulnerable in society. After all, prevention is better than cure. But I'd like to point out that the effects of the climate crisis are taking place right now in other parts of the world. The water shortages, for example, in South Africa, meant that the city of Cape Town, a city of 5 million people, was facing day zero back in 2018, but was saved by rain just in time. And the natural disasters that continue to plague the global south are worsening year on year. And if we take rising sea levels, we see a huge number of people in India, Bangladesh, and Thailand being forced to flee their homes. This map, the red band on this map, illustrates the region over which it will simply be impossible to live because it becomes too hot by the year 2100. And that's if we continue on this trajectory of business as usual. I'd also like to highlight the huge disparity between the countries that are using up the remaining CO2 budget and the countries that have been dealing with the effects of the climate crisis for many years. Also to bear in mind that CO2 emissions have a cumulative effect in the atmosphere. And this is particularly why the richest countries who have done the most damage also have the greatest responsibility to put things right. And this is why climate justice is a form of social justice. But virtual conferences are not only more sustainable, they're also more accessible. And by solving a problem that helps one particular person, it also can be extended and it solves many other problems. Let's consider the case of closed captioning, which is great for people who have a hearing impairment, but also those who may be struggling with the pronunciation maybe of the speaker can also follow the talk easily. Everyone gets a close-up and unobscured view of the presentation, which is great. And if you have mobility problems, you don't need to worry about wheelchair access. You can attend the conference from the comfort of your own home. We can also cater for neurodiversity, and also can bear in mind, acknowledge that not everyone likes being in a room full of people they don't know. And this is a cartoon that you may have seen different versions of, which illustrates these categories of reality, equality, equity, and justice. So in the first example, we could think of this as maybe a senior astronomer who has a huge pot of money for their travel funds. And so they could go to all of the conferences in a year if they so wished, whereas a student may be scraping together different sources of funding just to attend one conference. In the case of equality, maybe we can consider having a conference fee for students, so a reduced fee. So in that case, we're treating each of the students equally. But if conferences tend to be held in certain parts of the world, then there are students who live further away that are consistently going to have higher travel costs. So this brings us on to the idea of equity, that those from the less privileged countries can apply for travel grants to attend these conferences. But then the problem becomes that issue of finite resources. And we can't keep throwing money at the problem and expecting it to go away. It would be much more efficient, effective, and cheaper if we can remove that barrier, remove that need to travel to a conference in order to access the science that's being discussed and networking with others. This is what is referred to as justice. I'd also like to raise awareness about passport privilege, the hidden costs of being a scholar from the global south. So if you don't have the right passport, then you'll experience less freedom of movement. And my UK friends are now getting more of a taste of this, having left the EU. In addition to conference costs, there are the additional visa costs. And for some students in other parts of the world, they also have to apply for travel funds to attend an embassy, go to an embassy, and at the embassy apply for a visa to attend a conference, which may or may not be approved in time for the conference. So you can imagine how much planning is required to get all your documents together and what a draining process this could be. And this takes more time away from doing research. Even once you've got your approved visa, you experience hassle at the airports due to the immigration officers there. They may start to question, well, after the conference, are you really going to go home or are you going to seek refuge here? And if it isn't enough to discriminate based on a person's nationality, which they can't help, also to discriminate on whether or not a person has had the vaccine yet. And this is particularly a problem given that the richest countries have been purchasing far more vaccines than they actually require for their populations. And the World Health Organization correctly describes this as a catastrophic moral failure. So take my example where I'm in South Africa and I can expect to receive my first dose of the vaccine in November at the earliest. So if we go back to in-person meetings, does that mean we're knowingly excluding people in certain parts of the world? So how do we create an environment that is inclusive as possible? Well, this is where it's crucial to keep the door open. There are so many reasons why a person may not be able to attend in person. And I give many of those examples here. As mentioned before, the small travel funds, caring responsibilities for others, also just fitting it in with your other responsibilities, whether it's teaching or maybe you have ongoing medical treatments that you need to attend. But there are a number of other reasons why virtual conferences work better, actually, than in-person meetings. It's easier to learn people's names and preferred pronouns, an important part of their identity. There's no more sneaking a glance at a person's conference badge, which can be a bit awkward. We also have less incidences of racism and sexual harassment if we have a virtual meeting. And by including written discussion, this makes it easier both for people whose first language may not be English and to follow the conversation more clearly, but also to help those who are simply shy and don't want to raise their hand in front of everyone just to ask a question. So we we can also help those people who are feeling more self-conscious. And a couple of extra bonuses of not catching a cold or a virus even from others, and no food poisoning from the conference food. To conclude, I'd like to emphasize that if we truly believe that astronomy is for everyone, then we need to follow up our words with action. It may require more effort to include others. It may require more time to include others. We may need to sacrifice some of our social capital to include others. Will we take these steps to make astronomy a more inclusive environment? I hope so. As a final reminder that the actions of European astronomers have an impact that extends far beyond the borders of Europe. Let's work together to ensure those actions lead to a better future for all. Thank you for listening.